Welcome everyone. So thanks to the organisers of this and thank you to those of you who are dialing in. Quick intro about me. So I'm Thaddeus Parsons. I'm the design practice lead at SPARCK. For me, I mean, what really gets me going is understanding the bigger picture when I'm looking at how I might improve a service, and I'll talk a bit about that kind of stuff later. But I'm going to hand over to Steve first of all, and introduce himself, and then lead into our talk, and I'll see you all in a bit.
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you to the organizers and Chloe, obviously from DVSA, organizing this, and everybody for dialing in and who may be seeing this on a recorded session as well. I'll go through that. I'll go through this sort of in the order. So what we're going to talk about today is Service Design 101, what it is, sort of the so what of that, 10 things I value most in a service designer, and what to expect from a service designer. And then hopefully that'll be about 30-ish minutes, and then we'll have some Q&A after that. So please put your questions in the Q&A and we'll have a look at them. We're SPARCK, we're a team of 50 creatives, innovators, designers, strategists. We're on multiple locations, mainly in the UK. Lisbon isn't on here yet on this particular diagram, but we have other locations in the works as well. List of good clients. I counted 7 of these, which I think I participated in. At that, I'm sure you've been in quite a few of these as well, these particular clients. But we have a great selection of clients that we collaborate with. Our connection here is that we are born out of DVSA, this leading technology company, and we partner with over 1,400 technologists. Now, this combination between the DVSA and SPARCK is our sort of USP, and we coin that as a design to deliver. And I guess, as the saying goes, we identify the right thing to build, and DVSA builds it right. Now on to the main part, which is what is service design. Now, just a little preface, this is more of a personal opinion, mainly from our experiences. It's not going to be textbook aspects, but you will relate to quite a bit of it. Some of it will be familiar from what you may have heard outside of this, but we're going to give our personal edge on this to make it more relevant. Now, the question really begins with what is a service before we dive into what is service design. So let me explore that a little bit. So you may have seen this before in the context, goods are tangible and consumable and may require a more transactional method of exchange, like shoes and pens, sunglasses, whereas services are more the intangible, and they don't end up with ownership. These are like medical treatment, public transportation, and the postal service. So instead of ownership with goods, there's more of a relationship with regards to services, which implies a before, during, and after, or beginning, middle, end to that relationship. Which, however, in today's terms, there's no longer this distinction between goods and services. There's a blurring between the two. A lot of companies have this sit in this middle ground between offering goods and services. It's very rare do you have a company that just focuses on the transactional side of selling goods, or the relationship side of just services. And so most companies sit there in the middle. Now, by the way, products, just to clarify that, are specific goods that are being sold. For example, running shoes are goods, and Air Jordans are products that Nike sells. So on to my definition. Again, this is a personal view. May not be a definition that will satisfy everybody, but as a service designer and the experience that I have, this is closer to what I actually do. And I've got a couple of analogies, which you might find entertaining, that'll explain this a little bit. So a service is the exchange of value across the life cycle of a primary relationship that satisfies a number of needs and aims to achieve a set of desired results. So I've highlighted in red the things I think are most important here, the exchange of value. And it's not always money for things. It could be some social, emotional aspects. And that type of things that is exchanged may slightly alter over the course of that relationship. And it's not just the primary relationship is the key to this, but there's also other relationships that go on within that service that are secondary. And it exists to satisfy a need, but it is configured to achieve some sort of results. So follow on from that, service design is designing, excuse me, great experiences that look like that. Now, I'm going to use my my analogy here, and bear with me. It's called the tasty meal analogy, and it's an analogy of two parts, more precisely on two levels, and two levels which we can view service design. And the first focus is on value, and the second is on context or positioning of where service design. Positioning of service design amongst the other aspects of design that shape the way the service looks. Now, there's a third analogy, which we'll go to a bit later. I'm sure you'll be tired of all the analogies after all this is done. But it focuses on what makes up a service, its components, so it can be designed in the right way, which is probably the more familiar definition of service design that you may have come across. But let me explain. So this is something that you may have an analogy that you may have come across, but it highlights the aspect of value. So this analogy sits at the top, and it focuses on the most important aspect, and that is bringing value to the relationship. It's frequently used. You may have seen this maybe on the internet or whatnot. As it goes. When you have two coffee shops that sit right next to each other, each selling the same coffee for the same price, service design is the reason you go into one coffee shop and not the other. Now you might say, hold on a minute there. The difference could be down to UX design. It could be down to branding and marketing. And let's put the branding and marketing to the side and just assume that those are equivalent. But you might argue that that it is down to the experience that the end user gets from this, and whereas service design focus should be on the tools and the people and processes that you have to be set in place for the product to be delivered to the customer. And in many respects, you're absolutely right, but I have to slightly disagree, or at least add more to it. And I think it's more than just the alignment of tools and technology and processes. And I can sort of elaborate that with the next analogy. So this is my sandwich analogy. I'm hungry. Thought this is appropriate for an almost lunchtime talk. And this focuses on the context, and this is the shaping of how that service will ultimately look. And let's put that up. So the layer at the top is, oops, hold on just one second. There we go. So the layer at the top is strategy design, and the layer at the bottom is product design, with ops model design off to the side. That's a little pickle. And sandwiched in the middle is service design. Now the lower parts I describe as the execution layer, with the strategy layer at the top, and service design is the meat in the sandwich. It bridges the gap between service, strategy, and execution. And right down the middle, held together, holding this together, is research. It's a stick down the middle, then user research, market research. And given the interconnectedness of all these elements, it's rare to have, as a service designer, rare to be focused on just that sort of the meat in the sandwich as the things that we do. We have to bring together all these aspects to make sure and are working together. So yes, ideally we would have designers doing each of these things. In reality, that's not the case. We as service designers have to play a significant part in doing all of these things. And that's my experience. And so it really is these two different separations of the strategy level of thinking about service design and the practical level of thinking about service design. And that's my third analogy. But the so what part of it. So what? So this is what you describe as service design. You know, why should we care? If my business is my services are working fine, I have no problem. The new digital aspects of my transformation are going absolutely fine. You know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But I kind of think that that's probably not the case. I think there's things have changed, and I'll elaborate this with two questions. I'm going to break so what into really two questions. So I think, so what has changed that makes service design important now? And it really starts with this rapid change that we're in. Fourth industrial revolution, whatever you want to call it, there's macro trends going on. It's forcing change at an amazing speed. Digital transformations are how we're seeing it at the business level. And there's as a result, there's lots of new competition. There's more pressure to stay relevant all the time. And as a result, product organizations are getting blurred, as we mentioned before, services. So how do we, more businesses are looking to tap in to unlock the value of data within their organizations, to supplement their products with more data. And so they're extending their view of their interaction with their customers to create these relationships. And as a result, these things are growing in size. Services are getting quite complex. They're going across boundaries within your organization, boundaries across your organizations. They can really get unwieldy. And the interconnectedness. Something goes wrong over here, it affects something that's going on here. We often have to put on our systems thinking hat to really understand this quite heavily. So it goes on to the second question that I think the so what really is asking is, what are service designers doing differently that's making a positive impact for organizations? And for us, we are bringing in the people-centric aspect, in bringing this in through research, through co-creation, through storytelling. We are bringing in this design ethos. Some call it design thinking, but it's bringing in empathy, evidence-based design, experimentation, and helping them become more, organizations become more design-centric, design with a design ethos in what they do. As a result, service designers are actually breaking down silos. In order to bridge these gaps across these massive services, we have to be more collaborative. We have to traverse boundaries that you wouldn't otherwise have, and we're connecting dots that maybe organizations are having trouble doing, and that's what we're there to help resolve. And in order to then, we're joining the dots, we need to visualize this, we need to communicate this, and we do this by sort of visuals that able to zoom in and zoom out, service blueprint, which we'll mention, classic example of that. But the idea is that we're trying to build understanding across different domains within your organization and different aspects that otherwise wouldn't be talking to each other. And then as also, we are trying to test the service. So we are creating looking at these services, and we are able to test them either in whole and in part to reduce risk. This is quite often, this is a big thing for business, reduce risk. Identify early so that the cost of it is less when you have to fix something later. Now, that's the saying I put. Regret spend is a quote from a client that on a project I worked on, and we were doing some design sprint aspects to this, to delivering a product and digital service that they were offering, and he quite didn't get it while we were going through some of this experimentation, and the penny dropped, and he said, I get it. You're trying to help me avoid regret spend, so I don't have to spend money later. So that was this other view of trying to reduce risk. Now on to my final analogy, one more analogy, and this is about the more practical aspects of service design. This is where we delve into the components of the service. And as I mentioned earlier, people define the services as this orchestration of people, process, technology. And this is the level of which people are comfortable at: the front stage, the backstage, behind the scenes, how it all is delivered. And if people are wedded to that definition, then they probably aren't seeing the service design strategy aspect that I talked about with the tasting meal analogy. But I think from my experience, it's the combination of the two. And we as service designers have to create this conversation between all aspects of the organization, all that collaboration that we're hoping to be doing. And we're delving into that strategy, the value, also the components, but also the context of which the strategy, the service is being created or being changed within. That's me. Over to Thad.
Okay, thanks for that, Steve. So, yeah, again, I mean, this is my personal take on what makes a great service designer, at least some of them. I mean, we're in the business of designing services that help someone do something, right, that meets their needs now and in the future if we're at all sustainable. As service designers, we seek to understand what the pieces of the service puzzle are, and we work out which pieces that puzzle need to fit together and how best they should fit together. But what makes a great service designer? What attitudes or skills are important? Steve touched on some of these things, but they're worth going into a bit more detail. Next slide, please. So to bring a well-known phrase up to date a bit, no person is an island. And the same goes for service designers. So our work is closely aligned to the client's organizational strategy. It's firmly based on solid ongoing research with real users. And when products or interfaces are part of the service strategy, which they most often are in what we do, certainly, then having intuitive and accessible products makes a service sing. And which is one of 4 design practices at SPARCK. Next slide. So the other key thing to say is we don't just design, we design to deliver, and working closely with BGSS obviously allows us to do that in spades, as recent awards will actually attest to. So the second thing to say is that this isn't a competency review. And that any responsible consultancy with communities of practice, like us, we have, of course, thought long and hard about the kinds of skills that make great Sparkies and great consultants. We've broken it down, we described them, started to use them to inform recruitment and ongoing learning, but it's an ongoing process, as it should be. So instead, this is a more personal view about 10 things that I value highly in service designers. I was tempted to put a very clickbaity title around here, but I mean, that stuff drives me mad. So let's get into it. So relentless curiosity. I mean, for me, this is so important in our line of work. It's about being curious about people and technology in particular, but always looking to understand how they can best work together. So Paul did, I think, promise tips. So there's going to be a few tips for each of these. But really, the key thing here is that I don't know is okay. And actively listen whenever you can. Empathy. it shouldn't come as any surprise, but being able to put ourselves in someone else's place and see their perspective is so important. Understanding what's going on in people's heads helps us understand what problems we should actually be trying to solve, and what the opportunities are. So, to do that, observe real users interacting with the service, because quite often you'll see things that they wouldn't necessarily be able to say themselves, or sometimes even realize, which is not to say you shouldn't talk to them. I advise that all the time. The next thing is big picture thinking. Casting that net wide conceptually, beyond the obvious program or organizational boundaries. Understanding the full extent of the user's journey before they arrived at your service, what they do when they're there, and where you might send them when they're done. Breaking down silos is really important. And system mapping can be really helpful here, or ecosystem mapping. Starting with people, the values, exchange between them, moving on to organizations, layering again with product systems, etc. Building up that really big picture really helps the work we do. The next one, facilitation. Workshops are a key part of the way we work. We use them throughout the life cycle of a project to elicit opinions and insights, display and analyze findings, explore solutions, and clarify or reach consensus on key parts of the current or future service that we're there to actually design. But it's actually more than that. It's also about how we engage with each other on a day-to-day basis, really. In striking that balance between, being the subject matter expert or a coach, facilitating the right approach is really important. Quite often we're great service designers, but we're not the domain experts when we go into projects, right? Part of the challenge is actually eliciting all those great insights from clients and users, etc. Joining the dots, or spotting patterns, is really important, and closely related to the last one. Spotting patterns in behaviors, interactions, processes, outcomes, etc. Really important for identifying those common pain points or areas of friction, or good candidates for improvement. When you've got your research, slicing and dicing it in different ways, viewing it through different lenses, will help us do that. Needs, experience, actors, touch points, time. All services evolve over time or are experienced in time. So that's a neat way to do it. Embracing ambiguity. It's part and parcel of what we do. Acknowledging it enables us to examine and analyze our findings or ideas from different perspectives, which is critical. It makes the kinds of breakthroughs that enable great changes. When we describe how things are and propose what things could or should be, it's ambiguity or the unknown that kind of sits in the middle. So it's not always easy, but start with an open mind and focus on what you know and embrace that opportunity for new challenge. Visualization is really important in what we do. When we're visualizing findings, ideas, solutions, making the complex clear, being able to succinctly tell the story of what you found, where you're going or how you might get there, is fundamental really to what we do. And some of the artifacts that I'll talk about in a sec are obvious parts of that. But the tip here is, when you're doing that, consider the data, the audience, and the flow and the level of detail. Storytelling is really important. Getting people's buy-in for new products and services is obviously critical. This applies equally to the internal buy-in when you're proposing what can be perceived in some cases as seismic organizational change, and people are often nervous of change, and winning over existing or new users. Storytelling makes ideas more understandable, the future more concrete, and opportunities more impactful. And however you're doing that, be clear on, what problem you're highlighting, who the protagonist is, which user, for example, and what their experiences are. Prototyping, we do that all the time. Making and being hands-on is crucial to service design, and the other practices as well. But testing interactions, processes, communications, kind of end-to-end service or key parts in them, or the products that comprise part of that service, takes many forms. It could be physical, digital, abstract, or real. And the level of fidelity should really depend on, well, it does depend on what we need to prove out. And the key is, not to be afraid to test quick and dirty prototypes. To borrow a BGSS phrase, necessary and sufficient. Quite useful. But really, focus on those moments that matter, but consider the context in that journey and in that moment. But for me, I suppose to sum it all up, really, and it may sound a bit cheesy, but I think it's important. I love of people in a way, right? So wherever we sit on the spectrum, introverted, extroverted, somewhere in the middle, and ambivert or something, I think all good service designers are lovers of people in the way that they want to improve people's lives in some way, and they understand that engaging with them is the best way to do that. And that's at the heart of the kind of human-centered design process that we fully embrace it and live day in, day out at SPARCK. And sometimes starting that conversation is the hardest bit to do from both sides, but it does pay off in the end. I'm a believer in that. Really, we're only going to get to that understanding through that kind of dialogue, and that's what we do on projects. So, what to expect from a service designer? Again, this is my view. I've given you a flavour of what I think a great service designer brings to the table. But when they're designing the service sandwich that Steve talked about, what are some of the key ingredients? I think it's important to say that the things I'm just going to talk about, they're all living documents. They're created collaboratively with our project teams all the time. Sometimes we don't create them. They're done beforehand or by other teams, like the research team, for example. So I suppose the first one to start with then would be a persona. It's created based upon solid user research, representing different user types that might use our service, product, website, etc. In a similar way. Capturing those different behaviors of a specific type of user without expressing a defined personality, but really useful. And this is a typical artifact that is hopefully come from research prior to when we've hit the ground on the project. But quite often we do them, and we definitely add to them as we go. System map. So this is about showing all the different actors and components involved in providing a service, the kind of mutual positive or negative links. There's flows of energy, money, information, and they're useful for understanding the kind of the macro, I suppose, service dynamics and how the different parts of the service connect together. Related to that is the ecosystem map. So this is all those bits in the, that comprise the service, how they're interlinked, internal, external components of that service. Could be people, touch points, processes, systems. Really useful to understand how they relate to each other. And again, casting that net wide, quite often it's beyond the narrow definition of the client organization or something. It's quite often comprising partners and other things external to that service, but nonetheless critical to that user experience. User journey mapping is the next one. I'm sure everyone's familiar with this one, but they're really useful for visualizing either existing experience or thinking about what that desired experience should be. And context is important here. Where have they come from? What expectations have they got of the service when they do arrive? How do we treat them when they're there? And then where might we need to pass them off later? All these things, that end-to-end piece is really important. And then related to that is the service blueprint. It quite often will use that user journey across the top as the kind of the framing device, if you like. And then when we think about the verticals, what's underneath that, that's the kind of front to back piece, right? So how do those parts of the experience actually need to be supported internally or externally? What service components, if you like, do we need in place for that to work? People, teams, touch points, channels, processes, systems, all of that stuff. So really useful. And I suppose the document that we're most well known for. So those are kind of some of the things that you might actually see on a project developed or owned by a service designer on that project. But if you're thinking about what a service designer actually does on a project, these are kind of some of the key things. And it could be you. Quite often, service designer, the service design role is not that well understood. Some people are actually service designers with different titles. They may not, certainly in the earlier days. And I think, alluding to the question that Yvette asked in the chat, I think I was doing service design before I was calling myself a service designer. I think that's quite typical of everyone on the team here at SPARCK. It's a kind of long, winding journey to get there. And actually, I think the key to Yvette's question, it is a very, we've all got varied experiences, but I think we all got here because we were curious. We realized that the bigger picture was important, and we liked doing it, thinking about it, but also that the user perspective was critical. So I suppose to summarize, given what I've said, what Steve said, we're most effective if we can do these things, right? So involving users, understanding their pain points, needs, goals, desired outcomes, working with them to evolve the service, meets their needs now and in the future. Collaborating with teams across the client organization and beyond to create a service that properly supports the desired user experience, from customer service to back-end support and infrastructure. Looking beyond our project, working to understand how the service fits into the wider context of other connected services on the user's journey to ensure that high quality, consistent end-to-end service wherever possible. It's not always possible, but as best as we can. Going beyond the blueprint, it is the kind of most well-known artifact that we may produce, but it isn't finished until it's been implemented. And designing to deliver is key. The blueprint is only a blueprint, right? It needs to be made real. And part of that is testing our ideas. So we, hypothesize, define metrics, ideate and test with users, collect data, and draw a conclusion. And we need to innovate continuously. I think, the technology we use, the opportunities it presents, change daily, as Steve alluded to earlier. And we've got to learn to embrace the new, question the old, in order to design for the present. And that's all I've got to say on that. So I hope that's been interesting, piqued your curiosity somewhat. But I'll hand over to Steve now, who's just going to talk through a couple of recent case studies.
Yes, thanks, Dad. So we'll share with you a couple case studies they're recent, and we're quite proud of them. This particular one, the DVSA, Driver Examiner Services, you just won an award for the UK industry awards for Project of the Year, I believe. So just to give you a bit of a context, it really was about replacing an entirely manual and paper-based process. There was a 5-year strategy to improve road safety, user experience, and the value of money that the DVSA has identified to modernize the practical driving test through using mobile devices. And the BJSS and SPARCK team were engaged to design this particular mobile app and work with the driver examiners on all the different types of tests that they do, the different 16 different categories, obviously without compromising road safety as a result. And so from a service design perspective, I mean, there's all sorts of technical wins that went on with this, but obviously focusing on service design here. Engagement with over 300 users, amazing. I can't get my head around that, to be quite honest. But throughout the research, design, and testing, identifying early adopters to speed up the design cycle, doing in-car testing with a diverse set of users, and also focusing on accessibility, which is a massive topic, and just rapid designs of this over an agile 2-week cycle that we become most familiar with. As a result, successful live service implemented, 100% adoption, substantial savings, time and money, better user experience, bringing that service design ethos and whatnot into the DVSA, and obviously kept up with the award on that. So well done to the team for that. The other one is the Highways England Data as a Service platform, which I was involved with. I know that is connected to that as well. And this was about helping them modernize and become a data-driven organization. They're on a vision, they had a strategy to become more data-driven, utilize the data that they have in these pockets so that they can bring even better safety and reliability to the customers who are on these roads. And so they're an organization that had using thousands of spreadsheets and disconnected systems, and it's a very large organization. So it was about trying to attack that problem. There was a very intense forward discovery, looking at all the problem areas. And a lot of this was focused around the people using that data, the data analysts, the data scientists, the data community that within the organization. Lots of workshops running with these key user groups to try and build this holistic view of what this is. This is a new service that was being built rather than the previous case study, which was an existing service that was modernized, the particular, the way it was delivering that service. We went on to co-design the service, ensuring that the platform can lead to land with the business users and meet the needs of those people, the data scientists, the data consumers within the organization. Lots of blueprinting going on, lots of identifying the service in various different things. From a service design perspective, it was about building a service wrapper around a very technical product, a data platform, a cloud native data platform that was able to process these large amounts of data effectively, so that they can give, as an example, the image shows, a Power BI report with significant information on it that they could use to make valuable decisions. From a service design perspective, we successfully did that and had created this adoption service and an operational service that constituted the service wrapper around that, and obviously implementing that service through a target operating model and identifying the capabilities and skills they needed to fulfill that. So those are two examples, very different, but I think as service designers, we do two very different roles at different clients, and bringing out the different skills that we need, that Thad talked about. Not every project is the same. So you are a versatile player in all respects. That's it, really. We are available. We're gonna have some Q&A if you want to add some more questions to this, but we're available to answer your questions. These are our emails at SPARCK. We're on LinkedIn. If you want to get familiar with all aspects of SPARCK, drop us a line on the hello@spark.io. But otherwise, a big thank you for showing up. And if you have any particular questions, fire them on. I don't know, Thad, if you've been looking at the Q&A.
Well, so Yvette asked earlier about saying service design is a relatively new term to a lot of companies, and how do we navigate into this role? What other roles could diversify into this one easily? By the way, she loved the food analogy. I'll start in on that. Steve, obviously feel free to chime in, but as I said before, Yvette, it's I think everyone on the service design team has had a kind of long, winding road to service design. It is relatively new, certainly the newest practice in SPARCK and BGSS, evolving out of UX. And I think it started for most people because they gravitate towards the bigger picture, and they realize that it starts with user needs. The old days of the professional knows best are thankfully the old days most of the time. And it is, it's now about going out and understanding what users need, what their issues are, and how we can fix them, working with them to do that. In terms of other roles that you can move from to service design, really, there's overlaps with, it's certainly in SPARCK practice, there's overlaps with all of the other practices. So research, product design, strategy. People have moved from those things to service design, or quite often on projects we work. I haven't always been a service designer on a project, and I'm typical in that. We have a very broad range of skills, so there's a lot of kind of cross-pollination. But also, we've had some people from BGSS move across, and I hope to see more of that. So
me being one of them, SPARCK.
Steve being a prime example. I actually was officially in BGSS as well myself, but as UX, so not quite as dramatic a move as Steve, but these things happen, right? And that's great.
Yeah, we're a couple of the older guys in the team, and not older, well, probably, but also originated the team that we started the UX group way back when, and that evolved and ultimately merged in with the SPARCK digital consultants to create this dynamic group of designers. But just to touch upon the other aspect of that sandwich analogy, and it touches about all those different aspects of design. Those are the different areas of which we're seeing people migrate into the service design space. Whether researchers or strategists or whatever, they are. If service design is that sort of middle core bit, then you're seeing people coming from those different disciplines to become service designers. And some, some from, like you said, different maybe product managers or whatnot. So it is quite a diverse source that service designers come from.
Yeah, I think so. And in terms of the blueprint, is there a blueprint for a blueprint? Well, as with any of these artifacts, there's a million ways to do them. Ultimately, they need to serve the needs of the context you're in at the time. But I I suppose in summary, a blueprint will need to contain, most of the time it will contain the user journey that kind of runs across the top, as I said, kind of frames that. The verticals that run down there are all those things that need to support that interaction, or that key part of the service, the moments that matter, more or less. But commonly you'll see, we'll put key user needs in there, so that keeps us kind of on the straight and narrow. We'll think about the people or teams that actually need to facilitate those services, the systems, the tools that they will need to make that work, databases, documentation, processes, all those kind of things. So they're all part and parcel of what we would look to include in a service blueprint.
We've got a couple questions, Dad. One from Stuart. What challenges have you faced in businesses in accessing the required diversity of user experiences for your initial research?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, sometimes for various reasons, clients have been nervous about having us speak directly with their customers, for example. Sometimes it's because they feel they've been burnt badly in the past by someone that's maybe done that badly, or they feel they might end up, over-promising. But I think that the way to overcome that is to be honest with clients and honest with users. This isn't about, it's not necessarily about saying to them, right, we're going to do this thing for you and it's going to happen in 6 months. It's about, we want to understand what your current pains, frustrations are, and your needs, so that we can help solve them. It's a bit more nuanced than that. But I think all those client organizations that overcome that conceptual hurdle, if you like, reap the benefits, for sure.
I think just to add to that before we go to the next question is, I think we've used in the past where we've gotten access to just a small number of users and play back the value of what that research was and the insights that were given, and won their confidence, won the business's confidence to go and talk to further groups within the organization, further customers, and so on and so forth. Yeah, so it is about building trust and seeing the value in what we do.
Yeah, and one good way of doing that is kind of running a sense-making workshop. So, get all of our findings together, actually play them back to users, and have our clients involved in that process, so they can actually they can see, get close to the research and closer to customers, which a lot of the time they're not. And I think more often than not, once they are closer to customers and they feel more confident in understanding them, then they're more confident in pushing forward with more of that and the changes that we may come up with.
Yeah. Final question. In terms of collaboration, how do you work with the development side of BGSS? Do you have project teams, for example?
Well, we now, which is great. The typical scenario is that we're a blended team, SPARCK and BGSS. It wasn't always that way. I think, as an organisation, we've matured in how we integrate, how we sell our services as a combined team. And like I said, we don't just do the design like some agencies and walk away. Integral to that is having that obvious relationship with BGSS. We sprung from BGSS, and we can rely on that that kind of technical heavy lifting heritage that BGSS brings to the table. And when we can make things real and actually deliver on those designs, then that's a great place to be.
And I think embed ourselves in the agile way of working with the development teams is part of that. And I think there's a balance, and we as designers may be on a different cadence than the development teams, and finding that right balance between how we show our work getting done, as opposed to what the sort of agile team, the delivery machine views as getting the work done, and trying to balance that. And like you said, it's about communication and it's about collaboration. Sometimes it's easy because you're at that point where you're producing artifacts and designs on the product design level, but from a service design perspective, it's an evolution, and sometimes we have to play back and define our deliverables slightly differently, or maybe out of our comfort zone, so that it fits within the agile machinery, if you will. But it does work. It does work.
Yeah, I would say, there's no one way of agile. BJSS has its enterprise agile, but a lot of the way we end up doing agile is going to be dependent on how mature the client is in that themselves. So that's a key component in thinking how we approach that. So most projects have their own flavors.
Indeed.
Okay.
I think that's about it. Thanks to everybody that joined, and we will see you in another time, I guess. Chloe, over to you.
Thank you very much. That was a great chat. So just in terms of wrapping up, again, please feel free to use the emails that were provided before to get in contact. And also the recording will be hosted on bjss.com/Sheffield. Hopefully we'll get that up by the end of the day. But thank you very much again, Stephen and Thad.
Thank you, and thank you all to everyone who tuned in. Some great questions there, and like Steve said, happy to chat if anyone thinks of anything else later. Don't feel the pressure to come up with all the questions now.